camera doesn't open with my face. It opens with my hands. They're steady, calmer than I feel, as they lift a delicate bone china teacup, the one my mother's had since her own wedding, the one she only brings out when she wants to remind everyone she's still in charge of elegance. Steam curls from the Earl Grey inside, twisting like a question mark in the Sunday morning light. And then, with the kind of quiet precision that only comes after months of rehearsal in your mind, I slip my wedding band off my left hand and drop it into the cup. Plink. The sound is soft, but sharp, like a period at the end of a sentence no one knew was being written. I don't look up. I don't react. I just set the cup back down on the saucer with that careful click that says civilized, even as my pulse hammers in my throat. Across the table, my mother leans forward, her lips glossed the exact shade of coral she wore to my high school graduation, a color she associates with correction. She's been building to this moment all brunch. The sidelong glances at my empty ring finger, the exaggerated sigh when I mentioned weekend plans with us, the way she patted my hand like I was a lost kitten who just hadn't found the right owner yet. And then it comes. "No wonder you're still single at 35, she says, laughing like it's a punchline we've all been waiting for. Her laugh is bright, practiced, the kind that's meant to land as affection, but always leaves a bruise. Around the table, my cousin stifles a giggle. My aunt busies herself with her napkin. No one looks at me. They never do in these moments. They've learned it's safer to pretend my humiliation is just another course in the family meal. But this time I don't shrink. I don't force a smile or mutter something self-deprecating to ease the tension. I let the silence stretch until it's taut enough to snap. Because they don't know. None of them do. What they see is a woman in a linen blouse, 35, unmarried by their calendar, still living by their definitions. What they don't see is the man sitting 2 seats down, my husband, quietly refilling my mother's wine glass, while she mocks the very life I've built with him. He catches my eye for half a second, a glance that says, "I'm here. We're real." And in that fraction of a moment, I remember. I don't need their belief to validate my truth, but I do need them to stop rewriting it. So I keep my hands folded in my lap. I let her laugh echo off the crystal chandelier, and I wait, not for revenge, not for a dramatic reveal, just for the right time to let the truth settle into the room like steam from that teacup, inevitable, undeniable, and already changing the air. Because in a few minutes, someone will reach for that cup. They'll see the ring. They'll ask. And the story my mother's been telling for years, the one where I'm incomplete, waiting, failing, will finally crack open. And what pours out won't be tea. It'll be receipts. Right after that laugh, the one that hung in the air like cheap perfume, I turned slightly toward the camera, as if sharing a secret with just you. Not the whole table, not my mother, still smirking into her biscuit. Just you, because I knew you'd understand what it feels like to be loved conditionally, celebrated only when you fit neatly into someone else's storyline. Have you ever been praised for your silence? I asked softly, while being punished for your truth. I didn't wait for an answer. You don't need to speak it out loud. I could see it in the way your shoulders might tense right now, the way your breath catches when a family member says something that sounds like concern, but lands like a verdict. That's the double bind we're given. Be quiet to keep the peace, but if you stay quiet too long, they decide your life is empty. I chose silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I knew what would happen if I spoke too soon. If I'd told them months ago, by the way, I got married, it wouldn't have been my wedding. It would have become their production. My mother would have demanded a venue tour. My aunts would have argued over floral arrangements. My cousins would have turned it into content. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the quiet, sacred truth of what David and I built, the late night talks, the grocery runs, the way he held my hair back when I was sick last winter, would have been drowned out by their expectations. So I protected it, like you protect a flame in a storm. I let them think I was alone. I let them call me independent, like it was a euphemism for unwanted. I let them hand me the role of the spinster daughter so convincingly that even I sometimes forgot I wasn't playing it. But here's what they never considered. That privacy isn't the same as secrecy. Secrecy hides. Privacy honors. What David and I have isn't hidden, it's held. Carefully. Intentionally. Away from the hands that would reshape it to fit their fantasy. And if you've ever done the same, if you've tucked your joy into your pocket like a spare key, just to keep it safe from people who'd use it as a weapon or a prop, then I see you. You don't need a parade to prove your love is real, but you do deserve to be seen. So if this resonates, if your chest just tightened like mine did every time someone asked, still single, like it was a failure to report, drop a ring in the comments. Not as a boast, not as a performance, but as a quiet signal to everyone else scrolling in silence. You're not alone, and your truth matters, even if they're not ready to hear it yet. Because this story, it's not about proving my mother wrong. It's about finally letting myself be right on my own terms, with my own receipts, and with the man who never once asked me to be anyone, but who I already was. Our house has always smelled like beeswax and bergamot, my mother's signature blend, dabbed on her wrists every morning like armor. But more than the scent, it's the buttons that define the atmosphere. Not the kind on shirts, though she's particular about those too. No, I mean the collection she keeps in a tarnished silver dish on her dresser. Mother of pearl from her grandmother's coat. Jet black toggles from a 1940s suit. A single ruby red enamel one she claims was a gift from a French diplomat, though no one's ever verified that story. She picks one each time she's about to talk sense into someone, usually me. I remember sitting on the edge of her bed at 28, wearing a blouse with a loose thread near the cuff, when she reached into that dish without looking and fastened a tiny ivory button onto her cardigan. "You're letting life pass you by," she'd said, her voice soft but edged like a letter opener. "Men want certainty. You keep changing your mind, career, city, even your hair. How can anyone pin you down?" The button clicked into place, as if sealing the verdict. That's how it always was. The buttons weren't just accessories, they were ritual markers. Each one signaled the start of an intervention, a gentle but firm reminder that I was drifting outside the lines of the life she'd sketched for me. Marriage by 30, grandchildren by 35, a husband with a respectable surname and a firm handshake. Anything less wasn't failure, it was confusion. And in her world, confusion was the only true sin. But while she was busy collecting buttons to fasten the world into place, I was learning to unfasten myself. David never asked me to be settled. He didn't flinch when I switched from marketing to freelance editing, or when I said I didn't want kids, or when I cried for an hour after reading a poem about empty nests. He met my uncertainty not with a button, but with an open hand. And slowly, quietly, we built something that didn't need to be pinned down to exist. It just needed space to breathe. Now, when I pass that silver dish on my rare visits home, I don't look away. I look at those buttons and see what they really are. Relics of a language I no longer speak. They represent a time when I believed love had to be proven through performance, through rings on fingers, names on invitations, photos in albums arranged by someone else's approval. But my marriage, it lives in the in-between moments. The way he leaves the porch light on when I work late, the shared silence over burnt toast on Sunday mornings, the joint savings account labeled simply future. No audience, no ceremony required. Just two people choosing each other again and again without needing a button to keep it closed. And maybe that's why I can face that dish now, because I've finally understood. Some things aren't meant to be fastened. Some truths are meant to hang open, free, and utterly, beautifully uncontained. For as long as I can remember, my life in our family has been a supporting role in my sister's lead. Not because I was pushed aside, no. It was far more polite than that. It was woven into the fabric of every birthday toast, every holiday card, every family group chat update. Lauren's engaged. Lauren's pregnant. Lauren's moving into the perfect home with the white picket fence and the golden retriever named Blessing. And then, always, the gentle pivot to me. And sweet Emma, well, she's just doing her own thing. Said with a smile, of course, a pity wrapped in silk. My mother didn't outright say I was lesser. She just never treated me as fully arrived. While Lauren's life milestones were celebrated with custom cakes and professionally shot photo sessions, my achievements, landing a senior editorial role, buying my first car outright, publishing that essay that went viral, were met with a distracted, "That's nice, honey," followed by, "Have you tried that new dating app your cousin swears by?" As if professional success was a placeholder for the real work of becoming someone's wife. She called it concern, but it was curation. She was editing my narrative in real time trimming away anything that didn't fit the arc of the reluctant spinster, the cautionary tale she could trot out at brunches to remind other daughters to not wait too long. And the cruelest part, I played along. I laughed off the comments. I brought wine to family dinners where my singleness was the punchline. I let them believe I was fine because admitting I was hurt felt like admitting they were right. But behind that carefully maintained facade, David and I were building a life that needed no applause. While my mother was busy crafting captions for Lauren's baby shower invites, I was sitting on our worn couch, head on David's shoulder, comparing grocery lists and debating whether to adopt a cat or a dog. We settled on both, while she fretted over floral arrangements for Lauren's vow renewal. We were signing a lease on a 2-bedroom bungalow with peeling paint and a sun-drenched kitchen, our first real home together. We didn't broadcast it, not because we were ashamed, but because we were protecting something sacred. Every time I swallowed my mother's barbed advice about my wasted years, I'd come home and David would hand me a mug of chamomile tea, no questions, no pity, just presence. And in those quiet hours, I realized my worth wasn't waiting to be confirmed by a ring or a wedding date. It was already living in the rhythm of our ordinary days. But the imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was structural. My mother controlled the family narrative like a seasoned editor. She decided who was featured, who was footnoted, and who was cut entirely. And as long as I remained the single daughter, I stayed safely in the margins, non-threatening, non-disruptive, easy to summarize in a single, sad sentence. She never imagined I'd write my own chapter, and she certainly never imagined it would already be bound, signed, and sealed before she even knew the story had begun. Grandma Aliner has always lived in a world of quiet certainties. Her house smells of lavender sachets and old paper, and her hands, thin as parchment, but steady as stone, have folded laundry, kneaded dough, and written letters in perfect cursive for nearly a century. She doesn't do drama. She doesn't raise her voice, but she sees everything, and she remembers. I didn't plan to tell her. Not at first. The wedding was so small, just David, me, the justice of the peace, and 2 witnesses we'd asked at the last minute, that it felt more like a secret handshake than a ceremony. But 2 weeks later, I found myself at her kitchen table, stirring honey into chamomile tea, my throat tight with the weight of all the things I couldn't say out loud to anyone else. She didn't ask. She never does. She just watched me for a long moment, her pale blue eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, and then said, "You look lighter. Not happier, not married, lighter." And that's when I broke, not with sobs, but with whispers. I told her about the courthouse steps, the way David held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world, how we drove straight to a diner afterward and split a slice of pie like we'd done it 100 times before. I told her how scared I was, that if I told the family, they'd turn it into a spectacle, a performance, a test I hadn't studied for. She listened, not with pity, but with presence. And when I finished, she didn't say, "Oh, honey, you should have told us," or "Your mother will be furious." Instead, she pushed her chair back, walked slowly to the antique secretary desk in the corner, and opened the bottom drawer, the one with the brass key she never lets anyone else touch. She came back with a cream-colored envelope, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a bird in flight. "I had a feeling," she said, placing it in my hands. So I prepared. Inside was a notarized affidavit, dated 3 months prior, signed in her looping script. "I, Alina Margaret Whitmore, of sound mind and body, attest that on the 14th day of April, 2025, I witnessed the legal marriage of my granddaughter, Emma Lynn Carter, to David Michael Reyes at the county courthouse in Santa Rosa, California. I served as a witness to this union and affirm its validity without reservation." Beneath it was the notary's seal, crisp and official. I stared at it, stunned. You knew." She gave that small, knowing smile, the one that says she's been reading the room long before anyone else walked in. "I saw the way he looked at you at Christmas, like you were already home." In that moment, I wasn't just validated, I was documented. Not by social media, not by a diamond ring, but by the one person in our family whose word carries the weight of legacy. Grandma didn't just believe me. She'd already built a paper fortress around my truth, just in case the world tried to erase it. And when she patted my hand and said, "Some stories don't need an audience to be real, but they do need a witness," I finally understood. I wasn't alone in this. I never had been. The first receipt wasn't dramatic. It didn't arrive in a manila envelope tied with red string or emerge from a lawyer's office with a gavel echoing in the background. It lived in the most mundane place imaginable, a digital folder labeled Utilities and Home in the shared cloud drive David, and I set up the week we moved in together. Buried between PDFs of electric bills and our internet contract was a single scanned document, our marriage license, filed under household legal. I'd done it on purpose, not to hide it, but to normalize it. In my mind, marriage wasn't a grand finale, it was infrastructure, like plumbing, like Wi-Fi, something essential, invisible until it's gone, and absolutely necessary for everything else to function. So I tucked it where it belonged, in the quiet machinery of our daily life. But the day my mother cornered me in the kitchen after Easter dinner, smelling of rosewater and regretfully candid wine, was the first time I truly needed that document to be more than just a file. "You're running out of time, Emma," she'd said, wiping her hands on a linen towel like she was cleaning up my life choices. "Men your age don't want to start from scratch. They want someone ready, someone who's already figured it out." Her voice was soft, almost maternal, but her eyes said what she wouldn't. "You're damaged goods." I didn't argue. I didn't snap. I just excused myself, walked to the bathroom, locked the door, and pulled up the file on my phone. There it was, crisp, black and white, government-issued proof that I wasn't waiting. I wasn't broken. I was still single. The date, April 14, 2025, glowed on the screen like a heartbeat. The signatures, mine, David's, Grandma's, and our neighbor Mrs. Chen's, who'd been walking her poodle past the courthouse and agreed to witness in exchange for coffee, were real, inked in certainty. The seal of the county clerk, embossed, official, irrefutable, anchored the whole thing in law, not opinion. I zoomed in on my own signature. It looked calm, confident. Nothing like how I'd felt in that moment, terrified that someone would see us and assume we were eloping in secret, or worse, that we did mean it, because there were no flowers, no vows under an arch, no string quartet. But the law didn't care about aesthetics. It only cared about intent. And ours was clear. I didn't show it to her that day. I didn't need to. But holding that image in my pocket, knowing it existed, unchangeable, time-stamped, verified, was like carrying a shield made of paper. It didn't stop the arrows, but it kept them from piercing. Because here's the thing they never understood. I didn't get married to prove I was lovable. I got married because I already was. And I finally found someone who saw it without needing a performance. And that license, it wasn't just proof I was married. It was proof I'd stopped asking for permission to be whole. I gave her one last chance. Not because I owed her one, because I needed to know, for my own peace, that I'd tried. It was a Tuesday in late May, humid and heavy, with the kind of stillness that makes your skin feel like it's holding its breath. I invited her to meet me at that little cafe downtown, the one with the wrought iron tables and lavender sprigs in mason jars, the kind of place she'd always called quaint but impractical. I chose it precisely because it wasn't home. No family ghosts clinging to the walls. No shared history to weaponize. Just two women, two chairs, and the truth I'd been carrying like a stone in my chest. I didn't lead with accusation. I led with curiosity. "Mom," I said, stirring my iced tea slowly, "what would you say if I told you I wasn't single anymore?" She laughed short, bright, dismissive. "Oh, Emma, please. Is this about that barista again? Or did you finally adopt that second cat and start calling him your boyfriend?" She leaned back, crossing her arms like she'd already won a game I hadn't known we were playing. "You know I love you, but you've always had this fantasy about love. Real relationships take work, ceremony, witnesses, not just cohabitation with emotional support animals." I took a breath. Then I pulled out my phone, opened the photo of our marriage license, and slid it across the table. For a second, just a flicker, her eyes widened. But then the mask snapped back into place. "Oh, this," she said, waving a hand like it was a child's drawing. "Did you and David do one of those silly courthouse things as a joke? You know that doesn't count. No one recognizes that. It's not real unless it's done properly." "Properly?" I asked, voice quiet but steady. "You mean with your approval? With a guest list you curated? With a dress you picked out?" She didn't answer. Instead, she picked up her phone, typed something quickly, and a moment later, my cousin Leela texted me, "OMG, did you and David finally elope? Aunt Carol says you're delusional and trying to rewrite your life." That was it. Not concern, not confusion. A performance. She'd already framed my truth as a delusion and broadcast it before I'd even left the table. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a note taped to my front door. Not for me, addressed to the new occupant, as if I'd vanished. The locks had been changed on the family beach house, the one Mom and Dad bought decades ago, the one David and I had been using as a weekend getaway since I'd inherited my share after Dad died. The note said, "Per family agreement, access is restricted to committed, stable households. Let us know when your situation clarifies." Committed, stable. As if love was a status symbol to be verified by committee. That's when I understood. This wasn't about misunderstanding. It was about control. She couldn't bear the idea that I'd built something meaningful outside her narrative, something she hadn't orchestrated, approved, or witnessed. And rather than accept that my life no longer needed her direction, she'd rather erase me from the spaces I'd helped maintain for years. I stood there on the porch, key in hand, the metal suddenly cold and useless. And for the first time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt clarity, because when someone chooses to lock you out of your own history, you stop asking for the key. You start building your own door. The second receipt didn't come in a folder or a text message. It arrived in a stiff white envelope stamped with the county seal, delivered by certified mail on a rain-slicked Thursday morning. I remember standing on the porch in my robe, barefoot on the cool tile, watching the mail carrier's taillights disappear down the street as I tore open the flap with trembling fingers. Inside was the official recorded deed, proof that the house David and I bought 3 months after our wedding was legally ours, held in both our names, with no liens, no contingencies, and no room for reinterpretation. It was more than property. It was permanence. I'd known, of course, that the transaction was complete. We signed the papers, celebrated with takeout sushi, and spent the first night in an empty living room, just holding each other under a blanket, listening to the wind rattle the old oak in the backyard. But seeing it printed on county letterhead, our names side by side, listed as tenants in common with right of survivorship, made it real in a way that even our marriage license hadn't. This wasn't just a union of hearts. It was a union of futures, etched into public record. That same afternoon, I drove to the law office of Miriam Cho, our family's estate attorney for over 20 years, though she hadn't represented me until now. I laid 3 things on her desk: the deed, our marriage license, and Grandma Aliner's notarized affidavit. Miriam, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a reputation for surgical precision in probate court, read each document slowly, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. When she looked up, her voice was steady, but her eyes held fire. "This isn't just valid," she said. "It's bulletproof." Then came the part I hadn't planned for, but suddenly knew was necessary. "I want to send a formal notice," I said. "Not a threat, a boundary." Miriam nodded. Within the hour, she drafted a letter on firm letterhead. A cease and desist demand requiring my mother to refrain from publicly misrepresenting my marital status, whether in person, in writing, or on social media, as single, unmarried, or unattached. It cited California Civil Code Section 46 regarding defamation by implication, noting that repeated false characterization of an adult's personal status could constitute harm to reputation and emotional distress. It wasn't seeking damages. It was seeking truth. And it worked. 2 days later, my mother called not to argue, but to ask, voice strained, "Is this really necessary?" "Yes," I said, "it is." That evening, David and I sat on our new porch, watching fireflies blink in the gathering dusk. He didn't say much. He just reached over and laced his fingers through mine, the hand that still wore no ring in public, but carried every proof in private. And in that quiet, I realized something profound. This wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to let someone else's narrative overwrite my reality any longer. The deed was more than paper. The affidavit was more than memory. Together, they were a declaration. We exist. We built this, and we will not be edited out. I chose the Thanksgiving dinner on purpose. Not because I wanted to ruin the holiday, though I knew some would see it that way, but because it was the one time of year the whole family gathered under one roof, in the same room where I'd absorbed decades of quiet erasure disguised as concern. The table was set with the good china, the silver candelabra my grandmother brought from Prague, and the embroidered linen runner that always bore the faint stain of cranberry from some long ago spill no one ever cleaned. Tradition hung thick in the air, like the scent of rosemary and roasting turkey. They were all there. My mother in her cranberry cashmere cardigan, a single pearl button fastened at the collar like armor, my sister Lauren, radiating maternal glow with her toddler on her lap, aunts, uncles, cousins, all orbiting the familiar rhythm of nostalgic chatter and gentle ribbing. And then there was me, sitting beside David, who'd been introduced weeks earlier as my longtime friend, a label I hadn't corrected yet. We'd eaten the turkey, passed the sweet potatoes, laughed at Uncle Frank's predictable joke about gravy boats. The wine had loosened tongues, and the room hummed with that post-feast lull, that comfortable fullness when people lower their guard. That's when I stood. No dramatic sigh, no trembling voice, just the soft scrape of my chair and the sudden stillness that followed. "Before we have dessert," I said, my voice calm but carrying, "I have a small update." All eyes turned. My mother smiled indulgently, as if I were about to announce a new job or a trip, something minor, manageable, within the script. I reached for David's hand. He stood beside me without hesitation, his presence quiet but unshakable. "I wanted you all to know that, David, and I got married earlier this year." April 14th. At the courthouse in Santa Rosa. I paused, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. We didn't have a big wedding because we wanted our marriage to be about us, not performance, not expectation, and certainly not approval. Then I walked to the sideboard, where I'd placed a manila folder earlier that morning. I pulled out 3 copies, one for my mother, one for Lauren, one for the center of the table, and laid them down with deliberate care. On top of each was our marriage certificate, clean and official, with the county seal gleaming in the candlelight. My mother's smile didn't vanish, it froze, like a photograph left in the rain. She stared at the paper as if it might combust. Lauren looked from me to David, then back, her mouth slightly open. Someone dropped a fork. The clatter echoed like a gavel. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain further. I simply said, "We're not asking for your blessing. We're informing you of a fact. And going forward, we'd appreciate being referred to as married." Then I sat back down. David squeezed my hand under the table, warm, steady, real. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was seismic. For the first time in my life, the story wasn't being told about me. It was being told by me. And the truth, once spoken in full view, refused to be tucked back into the margins. 1 week after Thanksgiving, I invited a small circle to our home, not for a party, but for a reckoning wrapped in civility. Just Grandma Alina, my sister Lauren, who texted me the next morning, "You were married the whole time. I'm not mad. I'm hurt you didn't trust me." My cousin, who'd once called me the forever bridesmaid. And after a long pause, my mother. She almost didn't come. But curiosity, or perhaps guilt, brought her to our doorstep with a poinsettia and averted eyes. We gathered in the living room, where soft light pooled around the armchairs, and the fire crackled low in the hearth. No buffet, no background music, just space, quiet, intentional, and finally ours. I stood near the bookshelf, where our wedding photo now sat in a simple wooden frame. Just David and me on the courthouse steps, him in a navy blazer, me in a cream sweater. Both of us smiling like we'd just solved a puzzle no one else knew existed. I held a single sheet of paper typed, signed, and notarized the day before. "I'm not here to rehash the past," I began, voice clear and calm. "But I do need to be clear about what happens going forward." I read the letter aloud, not fast, not soft, just steady. It began with gratitude for the love they'd shown me over the years, then pivoted with surgical grace. However, repeated public mischaracterizations of my marital status, not as a mistake, but as a narrative used to frame my life as incomplete, have caused real emotional harm. My marriage is legal, witnessed, and deeply cherished. It is not a secret, a joke, or a phase. I named no names, but everyone knew. And when I said, "Moving forward, I ask that you refer to me as married," if you cannot do that out of respect, if you continue to frame my life as single in conversation, in writing, or in jest, I will need to limit contact until that changes. My mother flinched as if struck. There was no applause, No tears, just a heavy, humbling silence. Then Grandma spoke, her voice thin but firm. "She's telling the truth. I was there. And I'll say it again. She's married to a good man, and she's been treated unfairly." That was the moment the ground shifted. Not with a roar, but with the quiet click of a lock turning. This wasn't about shamming my mother. It was about making the invisible visible on my terms, in my home, with the facts laid bare like stones on a path. Public accountability in our family had always meant gossip, side eyes, and passive-aggressive group texts. But I offered something different. A formal, compassionate, documented truth. And in that room, surrounded by the people who once defined me by what I lacked, I finally stood defined by what I'd built. The letter wasn't an ultimatum. It was an invitation to see me as I am, not as I was written, but as I chose to be. The reversal didn't come with sirens or courtroom drama. It arrived in the quiet hum of normalcy, like sunlight finally breaking through after a long storm. Within 10 days of reading that letter in our living room, my mother stopped referring to me as single in the family group chat. Not with enthusiasm, not with warmth, but with a stiff, almost clinical correctness. "Emma and David are coming for Christmas." The first time she typed those words, I screenshotted it. Not out of spite, but as proof that change, however reluctant, was possible. Then came the subtler shifts. She stopped asking David if he was seeing anyone during holiday calls. She stopped sighing when I mentioned weekend plans as just us. She even once corrected my aunt when she called me the unmarried one at a cousin's baby shower. "Actually," my mother said, voice tight but clear, "she's married to David." It wasn't effusive. It wasn't loving, but it was accurate. And in our family, accuracy had always been the rarest form of respect. Legally, everything held. Our marriage certificate, our deed, Grandma's affidavit, they formed an unbreakable triad of truth that even my mother's narrative couldn't dissolve. When she tried, weeks later, to jokingly post a throwback photo of me at 25 with the caption, "When you thought you had all the time in the world," our attorney sent a single follow-up email referencing the cease and desist. The post vanished within the hour. No argument, no drama, just compliance. But the most telling moment came in January, when I received an unexpected package. Inside was a small velvet box, nothing flashy, just soft navy fabric and a note in my mother's looping script. "I thought you might like to wear something on your hand, now that it's official." Nestled in the lining was a simple gold band, engraved with the date of our wedding. Not an heirloom, not a demand, just an offering, a quiet admission that she was trying, however imperfectly, to meet me in my truth. I didn't wear it right away. Not because I didn't appreciate the gesture, but because I needed to be sure it wasn't another performance. But a month later, on a rainy Tuesday, I slipped it on. Not for her, for me. A symbol not of reconciliation, but of recalibration, a reminder that boundaries, once set, can make even the most fractured relationships find a new shape. The law didn't force her to love my marriage, but it did force her to acknowledge it. And in that narrow space between denial and acceptance, something new began to grow, not the old trust, but a quieter, sturdier thing. Mutual respect, built on facts, not fantasies. The fallout wasn't loud, but it was deep, like roots rearranging themselves beneath the surface after a long drought. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic disownments, no viral social media feuds. Instead, the consequences unfolded in the quiet withdrawals of presence, the subtle realignments of loyalty, and the slow erosion of my mother's unchallenged authority over the family narrative. She missed our housewarming party, not because she wasn't invited, but because she sent a hesitant text 2 days prior. I'm not sure I'd be welcome. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, she'd claimed the right to comment on every choice I made. Yet when confronted with the reality of my life, she suddenly questioned her own standing. I replied simply, "You're always welcome when you come as I am." She didn't show up, and that absence spoke louder than any apology ever could. In the group chat, the tone shifted. My sister, to my surprise, became a quiet ally, posting photos of David and me from our small backyard vow renewal. Just 10 people, fairy lights, and homemade cake, alongside captions like "so proud of my sister" and "married and thriving." Even my cousin, who once called me perpetually solo, now tagged me in memes about power couples with a winking emoji. It wasn't performative loyalty. It was genuine recalibration. They'd seen the receipts. They witnessed the truth. And they chose to align with reality, not rumor. My mother, meanwhile, lost something she never realized she'd taken for granted: her role as the family archivist. No one asked her anymore to summarize my life in holiday letters. No one quoted her concerns as gospel in private conversations. When she tried to steer a brunch discussion toward women who wait too long, my aunt gently changed the subject. The power to define me had quietly, irrevocably, slipped from her hands. And perhaps the most poetic consequence: the beach house. After the lockout incident, David and I filed a formal notice of co-ownership based on my inherited share. The family attorney, yes, the same Miriam who'd seen everything, mediated a quiet settlement. My mother agreed to restore access, but with a new condition. All shared properties would be managed by a neutral third party going forward. No more unilateral decisions. No more emotional gatekeeping. Just clear titles and written agreements. There was no punishment, only structure. No vengeance, only verification. Because in the end, I didn't need her to suffer. I just needed her to stop rewriting my life as a tragedy. And in the space, she finally left empty. I built something that didn't need her approval to stand. Grace, I've learned, isn't the same as access. It's not an open door, it's a carefully measured threshold, with conditions posted clearly at the entrance. A few weeks after the housewarming, I invited my mother to tea. Not at her home, where every vase and photograph carried decades of unspoken expectations. Not at a restaurant, where performance could seep back in. But here, in our sunlit kitchen, with the kettle whistling and the scent of chamomile curling through the air like an offering. She arrived with her usual composure, though her hands fidgeted with the strap of her handbag, something I'd never seen before. We sat at the small oak table, the one David and I sanded and stained ourselves, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't cold. It was waiting. Finally, I said, "I don't want to cut you out of my life, Mom, but I also can't keep letting you define it." And then I laid out the terms not as demands, but as boundaries carved from years of quiet pain. First, no more commentary, joking or otherwise, about my marital status, my choices, or my timeline. Second, if she wanted to be part of our lives going forward, she'd need to read Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Tawwab, a book I'd found life-changing, and we'd discuss one chapter over tea each month. Third, any future conversations about my life would begin with a question, not an assumption. Are you happy? Not, why aren't you? She listened, her eyes fixed on her teacup, the same kind we'd used at that fateful brunch months before, though this one held no hidden ring, only truth. When I finished, she didn't argue. She didn't sigh. She just nodded slowly and said, "I'll read the book." She declined the couples counseling I gently suggested. "I don't need a mediator to talk to my own daughter," she said, and there was pride in it, but also pain. But she accepted the book. And the next month, she showed up with notes in the margins, her handwriting smaller than usual, almost humble. We talked about boundaries not as walls, but as acts of self-respect. She stumbled over the words at first, but she tried. Now our monthly teas are quiet, careful, and strangely tender. She doesn't wear her button cardigans anymore, just soft sweaters, unadorned. And sometimes, when she looks at David, and me really looks, there's a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not approval, exactly, but recognition. As if she's finally seeing us not as characters in her story, but as authors of our own. I offer her grace, because I believe people can change. But I offer it with conditions, because I know they won't, unless the cost of staying the same becomes too high. And in that balance, between compassion and clarity, we're finding a new kind of love, not the kind that demands performance, but the kind that honors truth. Now, when I wake in the morning, the first thing I see isn't a checklist of what I've failed to become its light. Soft, golden, spilling through the east-facing window of the little writing nook David built into the corner of our bedroom. He framed it himself, salvaging old barn wood from a farm upstate, sanding it until it glowed like honey. It's where I journal now, where I sip my coffee, where I keep the small stack of documents that quietly hold my life together. The marriage license, the deed, grandma's affidavit, all tucked into a handmade box lined with faded blue linen, the same shade as my mother's old teacups. On the sill beside it sits my wedding band, not the one she sent, though I keep that in the jewelry dish, but the original, the one I wore the day we said "I do" on the courthouse steps. And next to it, under a tiny glass dome, is one of her buttons. Not the pearl or the jet black ones, just a simple brass button, tarnished with time, the kind that once fastened her favorite cardigan during all those interventions about my future. I don't keep it as a trophy. I keep it as a reminder of what I unbuttoned to be free. The house is quiet in a different way now. Not the silence of suppression, but the peace of alignment. David hums in the kitchen while making pancakes. Our cat, Miso, curls at my feet like a comma in a long, calm sentence. There are no group chats dissecting my choices. No brunches laced with veiled judgments. Just this, the scent of coffee, the scratch of my pen, the weight of a life built on mutual respect, not performance. I think sometimes about how close I came to internalizing her story, that I was incomplete, that love was something to be earned through conformity, that my quiet life wasn't real unless it was witnessed on her terms. But now, every time I sign a bill with both our names, every time I say my husband without hesitation, every time I look at that window and see not a barrier, but a frame for my own happiness, I know. I didn't just get married that day in April. I reclaimed myself. And the most beautiful part, no audience was required, no validation from the very people who doubted me, just two souls choosing each other, day after day, in the ordinary, radiant truth of what we built, together quietly and utterly on our own terms. If you've ever tucked your joy into your pocket like a secret map, just to keep it safe from people who'd rather see you lost than let you chart your own course, then this story was for you. Because what I learned in the quiet trenches of being underestimated is that your truth doesn't need a spotlight to be valid. It just needs to be held firmly, documented clearly, and defended gently, but without apology. I didn't win by shouting. I won by showing up with receipts, yes, but more importantly, with self-respect. I protected my marriage not because it was fragile, but because it was sacred. And in doing so, I gave myself permission to exist outside the script they wrote for me. That's not defiance. That's dignity. And if this journey resonated with you, if your chest tightened when I described that teacup, that button, that moment of silent erasure, then please tap like. Share this with someone who's been told their life isn't enough because it doesn't look like the brochure. And if you're ready to take your own quiet stand, drop a ring in the comments, not as a boast, but as a beacon. A signal to every soul scrolling in silence. You're not broken. You're just building differently. I'm also working on a follow-up video. How to legally protect your private life from family narratives, where I'll walk you through the exact steps David and I took. How to file a quiet marriage, secure joint assets, and set legal boundaries without burning bridges. Because sometimes the most powerful form of love isn't a grand gesture, it's a well-documented boundary, held with grace. My mother still doesn't fully understand my life, but she's learning to respect it. And that's enough, because in the end, we don't need their applause to live fully. We just need the courage to live truthfully, and the receipts to prove we always did.